recording for the meeting. Okay.
Okay, it's recording.
I think it's recording.
You might describe what meeting is this?
Yes. Thank you for attending the December meeting of the North Texas Renewable Energy Group. Thank you both to our in-person and virtual attendees, as well as to Kevin, who, after my roundabout version of trying to do some business really quickly, I will introduce and we'll get started on today's briefing, which is the main point of the meeting. Every month we get together and try to inform and disseminate and find ways to make our voices just that little bit louder, and Kevin's going to help us do that today, all of us. Again, the December meeting, I want to thank you all for braving the roads, and if you're still in your bunny slippers, it's waiting for you out there. The Christmas season, the holidays, etc., are always a time of joy and wonder, joy of finding your parking spot, wonder of how you got there alive with the people who seem like they've only driven once a year, and time for maybe watching something other than drug commercials on TV, etc. But whether or not you celebrate the holidays in a religious fashion, it's a great time of the year to just reflect on what's gone well through the year, what's going to happen next year, visit family and friends. So again, have yourself a great holiday season, however you celebrate it. And I want to get then through just a couple of pieces of business real quickly. We kicked off at the board an activity that we really haven't briefed the general membership on enough, but you've seen a couple of the trailers from it in terms of we're trying to get a set of standardized briefings together, different topics in renewable energy and adjacent space in terms of electric vehicles, home energy efficiency, where energy comes from and how it's used, etc. The thought, though, going into the spring season, talking about times to reflect and things to do, always a busy time of the year for us to get out and around. And we hope to generate a set of briefings that are really on a simple level. I mean, 10 minutes of messaging, maybe 30, 40 minutes if somebody gives you a longer venue to speak at, where any of our members could take this material out and use it. If you've ever been to one of Larry Howe's presentations representing the Citizens Climate Lobby, that's the 10 minutes and he can get the whole message out that they're trying to do. We're trying to get a set of those. Now, some of the other things we're doing on business, you will see us working through a little bit different of how we're going to use our website, how we're using our social media space. You will see a first large posting in a new format that's going to be called the Truth About Solar, and it's got a residential slant, unlike the speaker today. But frankly, things shouldn't be as hard as they are. If all you're doing is maybe, you should be able to go to Home Depot and say, I want the low end, the high end. Solar appears on your house, and but it's still just hard. You got to engage in the market. What type of inverters am I going to put on it? Do I want to be able to expand it in the future? Can I play it on the market even if I want to overbuild my system? Some of those decisions have gotten technically a little bit easier, of course, with more investment. If you also add batteries to the situation. But most of the decisions are not technical decisions. They just take an awful lot of education. And Georgianne just came in, and she's the one who's been leading the Truth About Solar. And we've borrowed from the material that we found through the Texas Solar Energy Society and American Solar Energy Society that has all the questions and topics that you should think about. And it's a long list. But it really doesn't even tell you what the answers should be for your particular situation. We're trying to add a little of that context, but even just on that one topic, it's tough. And again, if you're looking at other types of efficiency programs, Bill over here has full up microgrid in his house with as much control and interaction as you could possibly imagine, and yet he had to decide that value was good for him at his house. His assets are not part of a larger ecosphere of energy, that those capital investments could have been realized by all of us in whole. So lots of different things. The reason I bring it up is, again, we're trying to engage more of our membership to get out there and find the venues of the groups that they're involved in, take some of these standardized briefings and go out, if you want to look at the material on electric vehicles, look at the material on home energy efficiency, look on the material on national and Texas trends on energy production, et cetera, and go out and engage the public. So let's see, all that, I think I've talked, let's see, more business. Our January meeting is going to be held jointly with the North Texas Electric Automobile Association. And we're going to talk about energy prices and the future, electrical energy prices in the future. None of us being market players, so we're not representing, we're going to do a somewhat of a panel session, a few short briefings, and then just a discussion of a set of questions, and then take questions from the audience as well. What we're looking at is not yet the best graph of where we think the energy prices will be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But we're looking at those things that could be big movers. Let's say a 30% change up or down if XYZ happened. And the list is just in the first talks that we went through, there's about 8 different things, all of which we care about, which could drive energy prices up or down that much. And if you're going out and buying an electric vehicle and you're sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, a third of, another 33% gain on what I used to just pay for having my house, I'm now putting into transportation. Well, it's like, okay, that's 33% of today's prices. What if electricity doubled? I won't go into the topic that I was warned could be a 5-minute diatribe about the high energy power lines that are going out to West Texas to feed our oil and gas energy instead of, well, I'm not supposed to do that. So
you're not going to do that.
I'm not going to do that. Okay. A much longer description of it and why. But anyway,
we have a speaker waiting.
We do have a speaker waiting. So back to that, it's great to hear from somebody who has been able to, or will be able to tell us about how markets and technologies have aligned to allow good things to happen. As opposed, well, you probably will even, Kevin, talk about some of the barriers that are still out there and how to overcome them. But I guess without further ado, Kevin Richardson is a senior director from the American Solar Grazing Association. Again, this is a topic that is got a welcome audience in Texas, being a big ag state, and marrying up a renewable energy source to it is, we're going to find out, pretty easy. Thank you, Kevin. Take it away.
Cool. Thanks, y'all, for inviting me out here to speak. It's really a pleasure to talk about solar grazing with new audiences, especially connected to the renewable energy sector. I know there are a lot of groups in different parts of the country involved in promoting renewable energy and helping get past some of those challenges and barriers. So it's always exciting to share the solar grazing story with y'all. I do have a quick 5-minute video that's focused on solar grazing in Texas, and it's a great introduction to it and gets people excited. So I thought we could play that first, and then I can go into my presentation.
Turn it up, Bill.
Yeah, your audio is a little low also, Kevin.
Okay. Let me see. I can, if you want to play the video, I'll try and kind of turn up the Zoom audio on mine, so it'll go up.
Okay, we'll do.
All right.
Hang on here while I share this other screen.
The history of sheep in Texas is a long one. Texas currently has the largest sheep population of any of the states in the U.S., and it's been that way for a long time.
The largest sheep population in Texas was around 10 million. Today in Texas, there's roughly 500,000 sheep.
The biggest challenge that we have in the sheep industry is grazing availability or land availability. The options are to buy or lease land, and that gets really expensive, and that's getting more expensive by the minute.
This industry's been kind of trending downwards, but I feel like solar grazing is probably going to be that next chapter. We're sheep ranchers, but it's just in a very different place than what most people think about sheep being in.
It's a service. It's a unique service. Instead of using mechanical or zero turns of tractors, we use sheep.
The ability to graze sheep under solar panels is that win that the industry has been looking for.
Having them out here doing the job of mowers, it's just way more efficient, it's cost effective.
Farming is the only industry where you buy everything at retail and sell everything at wholesale.
The value of your product today is not what it's going to be next week or next month.
We don't have to worry about that because we're grazing sheep and we're getting paid by the acre.
If you have that consistent income from the service side of this business, you can kind of balance out the ups and downs.
We lost a big lease around February of last year. Trying to find land to replace that proved to be extremely difficult.
They've been needing land, they've been needing areas to expand, but that's one of the great things about solar. It's large scale.
Down here, we're talking about 1,000-acre plus sites.
We have a site that is a 700 megawatt site. It's 5,000 acres. It's in 2 counties. We never thought we were going to get this big.
I think that younger farmers and ranchers are attracted to the solar grazing industry because there is in fact a surplus of opportunity there. If we hadn't replaced that lease country, we wouldn't have been able to make ends meet as a family. One of us would have had to pursue a job outside the farm or ranch. Having the opportunity to be able to transport our sheep to East Texas sites has been a game changer for us.
And that just excites me, not only for what we do, but my kids or their friends or those people that want to be a rancher. They've got an opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise.
It's better for the land, period. I mean, as far down to the soil, everything.
The shading that's provided by the panels prolongs and improves grass production. A good portion of that is being harvested by sheep.
We're consuming forage, returning it back to that landscape in a usable form.
They're fertilizing the earth. They're keeping that solar farm that was somebody's farm. It's keeping it back in agriculture.
Our business primarily makes money off the lamb crop. Everything that we do to be a service provider is what we plan for and budget through the service contracts that we have. And due to the fact that we're producing a high-value lamb crop at the other end, allows us to have a business that's sustainable.
Hopefully, 30, 40 years from now, if this landowner decides to take this back into ranching, it's probably going to be better than when they turned it over to us.
Very few opportunities offer the ability to combine two things that create a symbiotic relationship.
We're producing more than just energy here. We're producing community. We run every one of these solar farms as a local ranch. Our philosophy is really, hey, let's make the most local community impact we can, especially in these rural communities here. Early on, I got a lot of grief from some of the old school kind of sheep guys that, kind of laughed about us putting sheep on solar. It's funny now, some of those guys in the past year have called me back and said, hey, how can I do that?
We are here to steward the land and to be able to cultivate that heart of stewardship in my children, I hope is a legacy that we get to pass on to the next generations to come.
What excites me about the future of solar grazing is that sheep are such a perfect fit for it.
This is just a starting point, though. I think in the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of changing. Now we're actually going to see a solar farm being called farm.
We have a much better story to tell.
It has changed our farming operation. We may not still be in business if we were still doing it the old way.
And the future is very bright for a person like me.
The sheep industry really needed a win, and this is it.
Cool, great. you hear my audio in the room a little better? It sounds like it's coming okay over Zoom, but can y'all who are in person hear me?
Maybe a little better, but anything you can do to speak up will help.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to speak loud, and I'm just gonna turn my output.
Just 1 second while we unshare maybe the next video.
Yeah, I thought I was unsharing it. Let me see. Hold on, let me find it here. Oh, they're still running. Okay, let me. Okay, let me get you back up here. Should be good. If you want to go ahead and share.
Okay.
You want to share the slides?
Yeah, I'll share the slides on my end. Can you hear me a little better now? I just turned up my microphone.
Yeah. Yes, it's better. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. All right, let me do screen share and introduce
By the way, that was a great video. Thank you.
No problem. I dropped a link to it in the chat. It's called Texas Solar Shepherds. It's a great 5-minute video. And it's really beautifully shot if you watch it, not over Zoom. So I encourage folks to check it out. And I also dropped a link to, we have about a 20-minute long documentary film that's really great. It's called Pastures and Panels. And it follows some solar grazers from around the country, specifically one in Pennsylvania, whose family had been farming out there since the 1700s, and solar grazing really saved the family farm for him. And so it's a really great story. It's a really emotional one. But yeah, they were great to check out and to share with folks about the solar grazing, what it is, and why it's important. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today about solar grazing, this thing that you can see in this picture right here, which is to me is a fascinating and really cool thing that has emerged organically across the country. And you heard it, I think it mentioned in that video too, it's rare that you get something that's so perfectly symbiotic, where you have sheep and agriculture that can happen under solar panels. It just happen to work perfectly with how solar sites are constructed throughout most parts of the United States. So this is what solar grazing is. You see, this is a sheep rancher here in the middle. His name's Eli Valdez. He's from San Antonio. And unlike a normal rancher, he's wearing kind of the normal rancher boots and jeans and shirt and stuff, but he's got PPE, he's got a hard hat, and he's got a high visibility vest, like a construction worker, because he's on a power plant. And he's running sheep on this beautiful site in Pearsall, Texas, near San Antonio, has a pollinator mix from Texas A&M on it. So this was shot in March, or actually in May, so all the pollinator species are coming up. And it's a really beautiful sort of mixture of sheep grazing, pollinator habitat, and then you have solar energy production. And this is about a 1,400-acre site, so it's pretty large, generates a lot of power, and generates a good amount of lamb too. So this is kind of the heart of the solar grazing story. To give you some background about myself, I was actually born in Texas, but grew up in California. My wife and I lived in the DFW area for a number of years after our first kid was born. And my wife's from Denton, which is where I am right now. I was going to try and make it in person, but some of the family stuff around Christmas, I couldn't make the drive out. But we lived here for a while. I worked in environmental advocacy in the North Texas area, in DFW, Dallas and Denton, and places like that. So I know the difficulties of advocating around those issues, even though Texas is becoming a leader in renewable energy, despite the best efforts of the Texas State Senate and other groups to try and block that. But it was definitely a big challenge, although really rewarding work. And then I started working with ASGA in about 2022, just part-time, helping out with their educational webinars, hosting and planning those. And as the organization has grown, I kind of took on a full-time gig there about a year and a half ago or so. And I've been doing a whole bunch of different things within ASGA. It's a nonprofit, so you have to wear a lot of hats in a nonprofit, which is fun and also challenging. So I do a lot of work around educating folks, promoting it at conferences and events, and then strategy behind the scenes, working with our solar company partners, working with our farmer members and all that. So a lot of good work. And now I live in Philadelphia on the East Coast, so I've kind of migrated from west to central to east over my life. But big change from California, but it's fun. And I don't have a background in agriculture. I never thought I would really work in the agricultural space, but this kind of happened serendipitously through my work around environmental advocacy. My mom grew up on a cattle ranch not too far from Waco or Temple, but I grew up in the suburbs, and I remember my mom telling us that she didn't want to go camping because she spent enough time sleeping outside on their porch during the hot Texas summers, and she didn't want to be around anything agriculture again. So kind of grew up far from that, but ended up here, which is an exciting spot to be. So I'll introduce you to the American Solar Grazing Association, which is the organization that I work for. And like I said, it's a nonprofit. It's a 501c6 trade organization for the farmers involved in solar grazing. And it really was founded by some of the initial solar grazers. We were founded about 2018, and solar grazing in the United States probably dates from about 2013, 2014 at the earliest. There's some folks in North Carolina, Texas, and New Jersey, New York kind of started doing it around that time, testing it out. And really around 2018, that was when it started happening more frequently. And I'd say in the last 2 years or 18 months, it's exploded sort of exponentially as people have worked out how to do it. And we'll talk more about how widespread it is. But really, ASGA, as we call it, American Solar Grazing Association, ASGA, started with these early farmers, especially in New York, around like Ithaca and other parts of the upstate New York, those rural areas, kind of getting together, driving past solar sites, very small ones, not like the big ones in Texas. We're talking about, 7 or 8 acres, 1 or 2 megawatts. And just seeing, be like, hey, that grass underneath those panels might be good pasture for my sheep. I wonder, how could I get in touch with a solar company? Would they let me put sheep on a solar site? How would that work? And from those initial questions and figuring it out, they started doing it and experimenting with it and found out it worked really well for maintaining vegetation on solar sites. And that process evolved into these early solar grazers experimenting with it and kind of figuring out how to do it and then teaching it to other people. And then they get phone calls from shepherds from different parts of the country. And they're like, all right, well, we're getting a lot of phone calls. Let's just throw all this information up on a website and then people will leave us alone. So they did that and then no one left them alone. More people called. And so that led to the formation of a membership organization where people could purchase memberships and then learn all the information that the early solar grazers had figured out. And then as other people in other parts of the country started figuring out different ways to do it, we all started teaching each other about it. And I don't actually do solar grazing. I just work for the organization and do all the educational stuff. But a lot of what we do is facilitating that exchange of information. So from that early process, what we do is we set the standards and best practices industry-wide in the United States and Canada about solar grazing. And then we try to teach that and provide technical assistance on it. So we do a lot of educational webinars, in-person trainings. We have 2 certification programs. One is for solar grazers. That's an in-person 3-day training. The other is for the solar industry for employees that we call What to Expect When You're Expecting Sheep, which we haven't been sued about the title yet. But it's a great crash course for the solar industry about how sheep management works on their solar sites and how they can best partner with farmers. And we do a whole bunch of virtual online trainings as well. The core of ASGA is actually an online social network that's kind of private to our members. And we do monthly webinars, and we have tons of resources, recorded webinars, fact sheets, things like that are on that network. And we also have quite a few useful materials on our public website, solargrazing.org, which I dropped in the chat, including some great case studies, fact sheets, and those videos and stuff like that. So we do that, and then we work to connect farmers and solar companies together. It's not easy for farmers to get in touch with the solar company, and it used to be a lot harder, and we've been working kind of hard to bring those industries together. And of course, we go around promoting solar grazing and its benefits at ag conferences, renewable energy conferences, and as we get more capacity and time, hopefully at other events and with groups like y'all. And then we've been since the beginning of solar grazing, we've been involved in all the leading research around it to try and prove that it works and now to prove what its benefits are. We've worked with like American Farmland Trust, the National Renewable Energy Lab, Cornell, and other groups. So really done a lot of great research on it. Cool. So now we can dig into the details of the presentation. And as I go along, if you have questions, feel free to stop me. I know there's going to be questions at the end, but if you need me to clarify things, just feel free to pause or just come off mute and yell at me. I host a lot of webinars, so I like it when people jump in. So stepping back, there's this term, I don't know if you all have heard of it. It's called agrivoltaics. It's the term of art within the solar industry and the ag industry and all the government and nonprofit worlds around that for what this thing is of we call solar grazing or combining agriculture and solar. It's a mouthful. I say it, for the first time, people are like, what? Agro what? And I'm like, agrovoltaics. And then it's because it's kind of a weird word. I like it, but it's definitely something I don't use as much publicly, but it is the standard word within the industry. And as legislation comes out about agrivoltaics, about agriculture on solar sites, this will probably be the word that's used. And it's a combination of agriculture and photovoltaics. But really what it means is, you combine a ground-mounted solar site, so a solar site out in pasture, not on top of a rooftop, not on top of a factory, but out there over grass, essentially, with agriculture. And it's really exciting and really cool idea and makes a ton of sense. You have all this land, you have panels on top of it, there's grass growing under it. Why not do something interesting with that grass? The other terms that you'll hear for it are called dual use, which is a little bit easier to say. Or sometimes people say agri-solar because it's a little bit easier to understand than agrivoltaics. And then solar grazing is a form of agrivoltaics that uses livestock to graze under solar panels. And those are pretty much exclusively sheep at this point in the United States. A little bit with cattle in certain parts of the country, and I'll talk about that later. And people have tried goats, and goats don't work because they chew wires and jump on top of solar panels. So goats would be good for vegetation management because they'll eat everything, including your shoe, but that's also why they're bad because they'll eat the wires. But there might be a future where we have some goats on solar sites, but not right now. They tried it out a couple times on solar sites years ago, and now goat is a four-letter word in the solar industry, so we don't talk about goats.
It's not greatest of all time.
Yeah. So what is solar grazing? Again, it is, generally speaking, livestock grazing on a solar site. It is the leading form of agrivoltaics in the United States. So it's pretty much the vast majority of all agrivoltaics happening in the country is going to be sheep grazing under solar panels. I want to emphasize this point again, that it is agriculture. So you are producing a product, primarily lamb, a lesser extent wool, only because the wool industry in the United States has been in the dumps for a long time, unfortunately, even though it's a great product, especially if you get towards sustainable fiber. Wool is, fantastic for it. It's not going to put microplastics into the water or the environment, but at the moment, the wool industry in the United States is not doing so great. So mostly lamb is the agricultural product being produced. And of course, the ecological benefits, you're also essentially producing grass and things like that too. So there's more to it than that, but the main kind of commodity would be lamb. As I mentioned, so you're using sheep to manage vegetation on solar sites, and I'll get into more of what that means. But basically, the initial solar grazers saw that there was grass growing under solar panels, and if you're a solar company with a solar site, you have to do something about that grass because if it grows too tall, it will shade the panels, like in this picture right here. And if it shades the panel, it reduces the energy production. And a lot of these sites are programmed such that if you get too much shading on a few of the panels in a row, it'll shut down the whole row. So it will significantly impact energy production. It also gets into equipment. There's some moving parts on solar sites that have what they call a single axis tracker where it tracks like this to catch the sun. So it can get in those parts and stop kind of break them. And then in California and parts of Texas and other parts of the country, if there's a lot of vegetation under solar panels, when that dries out in the hot and dry parts of the summer, it becomes a huge fire risk, especially in California. So a lot of grazing is done for fire mitigation, fire prevention, to reduce the fuel load underneath the solar panels. So essentially, in most parts of the country, you have to mow under the solar panels. So the beautiful kind of symbiotic relationship of sheep grazing is, well, why not graze with sheep? They can do the same job pretty much, and they're great at it. So you can have sheep mowing under there. You don't have to get a mower. You don't have to create emissions through mowing, and you can help support agriculture and provide opportunities for farmers. And that's really kind of the genesis of that. And then sheep are perfectly suited for solar sites. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And the other thing to keep in mind here with solar grazing is that regional diversity is key. So we're talking about agriculture varies dramatically from place to place throughout the country. So does the land and vegetation under solar. So how you manage a solar site with sheep in Texas will be different from Indiana, which will be different from New York, which will be way different from California. And I can talk about those in a little bit, and feel free to ask like more of those questions about those as we dive into it. But regional diversity is key. And then this is kind of the other big point here, really, and it's kind of what I've been hitting on a lot, is that solar grazers provide a needed land management service to the solar industry. That's essentially where this kind of comes together. And the biggest issue that farmers run into when they start grazing sheep on solar sites is that they're no longer just raising animals on pasture. They are providing that paid service to a solar company, and they have to think like a service provider, like your landscaping company, or think of any other company that provides a service to you. They have to think of the solar company as their client, and they have a contractual obligation to keep the vegetation a certain height so it doesn't mess with energy production. And so they have to do everything they can to keep to maintain the grass and the vegetation to that standard, while also raising livestock, while also being farmers. So that's the biggest issue that farmers run into. They like get excited. They're like, oh, I'm going to get paid to bring sheep onto a solar site. That's awesome. And they're like, oh wait, I have to be on call pretty often. I have to make sure there are no problems. It's not just me minding my animals in a pasture I rent or on my home farm. So that transition is a big one for farmers, and it's a difficult one, and a lot of farmers can't make that transition, which is totally fine. It just means it's not for them, but that's the kind of biggest kind of psychological or professional barrier to the grazers, really. Like I said, this is just an elegant solution. The solar industry needs vegetation management. They need land management, and sheep are custom made to work under these solar panels. And so it's really perfect relationship. And since you guys are a renewable energy group, I wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking from the solar company perspective of why they would do this. Why would you bring sheep onto a solar site? And part of what I want to kind of convey to you guys is, there is a lot of conflict around solar siting, where you build solar sites in the United States. Not so much in Texas, because of Texas's permitting rules and how it works there, but especially in the Midwest and Northeast. And there's a lot of concern about the loss of farmland in general, and those are real concerns. Losing farmland is a huge issue. And solar is, in a lot of places, a lot of the siting that's going forward is going to be on former farmland, former pasture land, or current farmland, current pasture land. The kind of response we usually give is that in comparison to how much farmland is being lost to Walmarts and subdivisions and things like that, it's much, much, much less. So solar is a very small part of that issue. But if you think about how much solar we need in the United States to meet our renewable energy goals, I know back during the Biden administration, for their net zero goals, at some point, SEIA, the big trade organization for the solar industry, or one of the trade organizations for it, calculated out that you probably need about 10 million acres of solar to meet those net zero goals. Again, this is a calculation from a few years ago. Those calculations, vary depending on what technology is like, and et cetera. But so assume you need 10 million acres of solar. That is a lot of land for the solar industry to manage. And these companies are primarily in the business of making megawatts. They're not in the business of managing land. But in order to make those megawatts, they have to manage land on really diverse types of land with diverse forages and vegetation. And generally speaking, when they build a solar site, they're going to seed a solar site with a particular type of vegetation or cover crop, or vegetation. But, a solar site in San Antonio, Texas is going to be different from a solar site that might be 50 miles away, based on what the conditions are, based on whether it was pasture land beforehand or crops or something completely different. And so this industry is built around megawatts and engineering, and they do have a lot of, environmental folks working for them, vegetation folks and things like that. They're, adopting those skills, but it's not primarily around land management. So there's a huge value in bringing in a local agriculturalist, a local farmer, to help manage that land for you with their sheep or livestock, or if you end up doing crops under it. Because, it's just going to be a lot, generally speaking, easier if they know what they're doing than a company that is worth $1 billion that has sites everywhere from California, Colorado, Texas, South Carolina, Florida, New York, Ohio, Indiana, all those states with different regions, different climates, and the solar sites also create different microclimates under it. It's just going to be helpful to have local agriculturalists in all those different parts of the country managing land on your solar site. So why would a solar company use sheep? Again, employing a local farmer is great, but the sheep themselves are also incredibly beneficial. They're really good at controlling vegetation. They're what we call browsers, so they'll eat a wide variety of different vegetation, more so than some other species. The ideal scenario would be if you had like a multi-species grazing situation with some cattle, sheep, and goats either following each other or kind of together. That would cover the most vegetation, but sheep are just really good. They just happen to be the right size to fit under solar panels. I don't know how familiar folks are with solar site construction, but these ground-mounted solar arrays that you see out if you're driving up I-35 are generally speaking, when the panels are tilted at their maximum tilt, the lower edge of the panels from the ground will be anywhere from 18 inches to 36 inches usually. And 18 inches is a little tough, but 24 or 36 inches, the sheep can really get under really well, which is great. And it's really hard to mow a solar site. There's just a lot of issues, like getting on a mower and mowing a solar site, depending on how it's constructed. Sometimes you can fly down the rows, but then you still have to trim underneath the panels around the poles, what they call the piles and stuff. And everyone hates it. No one likes mowing a solar site. It's like the most unenjoyable thing you can do. And sometimes you have to use ridiculous equipment or string trimmers or things like that. And it's not easy, and it can be really expensive, especially if you're in somewhere like Maryland on the shore where you get tons of rain, tons of vegetation growth, and you're mowing for 6 times a year or more. It gets really expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, for these large solar sites to mow it. So sheep can work under the panels, and they can reduce some of those costs that are associated with mowing. They're on job 24/7, and they're also good for equipment. So mowers sometimes will kick up rocks and break panels. The sheep, generally speaking, won't kick up rocks, and they very rarely break panels. It takes a lot for a sheep to break a panel. Usually needs a flock being spooked or something like that. And then I'll add the caveat here that most sheep grazers on these big sites, especially in Texas and other places like that, are going to be using a hybrid mowing grazing model. So basically, the goal is to primarily graze the site as much as possible with sheep, and then do supplemental mowing around certain types of equipment, or like once a year if they need to in order to control the vegetation. There's a whole calculation that goes into that, and then some of it comes down to, and this would be getting into the weeds, but comes down to, when you first build a site and it's constructed, the ground's been torn up and gone through construction. It takes a little while for the vegetation to establish. So those early few years, it might take more mowing and less sheep. And then it gets kind of more to primarily sheep, like 80-90% sheep grazing, or some sites, they're good to go from the beginning. You can just mostly graze with sheep. And I see Alton's message in the chat about corn. 40% of corn grown in this country goes to ethanol. That's, one of the things, we bring up with solar. It doesn't help to disregard or criticize the concerns about losing farmland. But yeah, if you think about how much land would go into solar that is currently farmed in the United States, probably less than 0.5% will end up being solar, or maybe less than 1%, versus far more land goes to growing corn for ethanol and things like that. So in terms of solar taking away farmland, big difference. So yeah, and then again, we mentioned this responsible land stewardship. We know targeted grazing with sheep has huge soil benefits, biodiversity benefits, and those we're seeing borne out on solar sites. Can help pollinator habitats. Some healthy vegetation obviously improves carbon sequestration, and you're using fewer chemicals, and you're not emitting as much gas or emissions from gas mowers. So those benefits. And then this is a big one for the solar industry. When they first started building these solar sites, a lot of times they wouldn't ever talk to the community. They just submit it to the county. The county would probably approve it because there's fewer conflicts around solar 10 years ago. And there's only like 3 or 4 years ago that the industry started thinking about, oh crap, we have to go and do community engagement in these rural areas because they're for various reasons, some which come from kind of culture wars or you're being anti-solar, and some of which are, real concerns, but they kind of realize we have to go in and they're actually like engage with these communities. We're building a big solar site, providing a lot of tax revenue to counties. So community engagement really became a big issue in the industry, as you all probably know. And the solar grazing can help with that, and it varies by region and what's going on, but you're keeping land in agriculture, so that can help with some of these issues around losing farmland. And it can also infuse the rural economy a little bit by if you're mowing a solar site, you're not contributing back to the ag economy, but if you're doing sheep on it, the sheep farmer is buying feed from the local store using local equipment, things like that. So it kind of helps keep that agricultural money flowing in the local economy, especially if they're doing it at scale. And yeah, the cool thing about sheep grazing is, your average farm in the United States, what, 54 or 55 or older. And at solar grazing, we're getting lots of cool stories of young folks getting involved in agriculture or coming back to agriculture. You saw in that video, the Hodges, Cade, and Morgan, they're the ones who lost that lease. They're in their early 20s or mid 20s, and they're able to be farmers and be full-time ranchers and not have to take a job outside of ranching through solar grazing. This photo here is the guy at the beginning, Eli Valdez in the middle, and his sons Eli Jr. and Eric are on either side of him. They're working with him in his business. So you get a lot of people who are kind of coming together, a lot of younger folks getting involved in solar grazing through that. And then, as I mentioned, and helping with the public publicity around it, oftentimes the solar grazer becomes the face of a solar project for the community, and that has a lot of positive benefits. And especially as you're developing a solar site, if you're planning to have grazing on it, you can work with that solar grazer in these community meetings, these county permitting meetings or township permitting meetings to help connect with the local community, especially if they're from the area. It's one thing if a solar company sends an attorney who shows up in a Mercedes wearing a suit to a county permitting meeting versus if you have a sheep farmer who can walk in there and start talking soybean prices with folks and really is connected to that community. And just kind of a caricature, like the solar industry employs a lot of really wonderful people who do community engagement who are really good at it. And increasingly they're getting better at it. But even those best sort of community engagement folks who do a wonderful job working at solar companies are still not going to be quite as good as a farmer who can connect with these rural agricultural communities. And this is a study done by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab about kind of the positive impact of agrivoltaics. And basically they showed like a sort of an increase in sort of positive feelings towards solar development if you're having agrivoltaics components on it. And again, this will vary by region, in parts of the country, they're so anti-solar they don't care, but in a lot of parts of the country, having some sort of farming component on the solar site can help with that permitting process. And there are solar sites in development in places like Ohio, Indiana, and other parts of the Midwest and Northeast where they have promised to do sheep grazing on a solar site or other forms of agriculture, and that's how the site got passed and got its permit in order to be constructed. And you'll see that, I think, increasingly in those parts of the country, not in places like Texas, where the ability to obstruct solar permitting locally isn't quite as intense. And there seems to be some more respect for if your neighbor wants to lease out his ranch to a solar site, there seems to be more of a we're not gonna mess with his property rights kind of thing, versus we're seeing in places like rural Pennsylvania, rural Ohio, rural Indiana, it's kind of the worst, where it's like really like, oh, my neighbor is going to, sign a lease with this big solar company that's going to build a solar site on his land. We don't want that to happen. But interesting dynamic. So grazing can be a way, and agrivoltaics can be a way to mitigate that. And I talked a lot about the benefits for the solar companies, those soil health benefits, the excellent service provided. For the farmer and rancher, the big thing is you're getting a stable income source. So you're getting paid a fee per acre, like a mowing company would be, to manage vegetation on our solar site. So you're raising a lamb crop on that solar site, generally speaking. You might lamb at home or you might lamb on the site, but that solar site's feeding your sheep for your agricultural production, and you're getting paid a fee per acre. And this is radically awesome for farmers because usually you're dependent on whatever the market's giving you that year. In the sheep industry, it's hard to break even, and that's why the sheep industry in the U.S. has been on the decline for decades, as you saw a little bit in that video. And our 20-minute documentary talks more about this. But since World War II, basically, you had a lot of veterans eating cold canned mutton out in Europe. And after that, no one wanted to eat sheep, or no one wanted to eat lamb after they came back from World War II. And since then, there's been a real, almost every year on year in, like a decline in the number of sheep in the United States until last year, where they actually went up a little bit. And probably, we don't know for sure, but my guess is it's because of solar grazing. So anyways, you get a good stable income source, which is incredible. And even if you think about not just sheep, but it's hard to make money as independent producers in cattle or in, farm like corn or soybean growers also aren't, oftentimes they break even or lose money, even with subsidies and things like that. Mm-hmm. Is someone asking a question? Okay. So sheep is sheep is like a great way if you're making that fee and then selling your lamb, you can make not a ton of money, but you make enough to be sustainable, make a profit, pass on that land to your um, next generation if they're interested. Yeah, so question in the chat, what percentage of land used is owned by the farmer leasing the land to solar compared to solar company owned land that employs the shepherd as a mowing company? So the next point here is about access to land, and that kind of touches on this question. So usually, generally speaking, the biggest barrier for agriculture, as you saw in that video, is access to land. It's hard to buy or rent land in the United States. It's even getting expensive in Texas, but if you're in Indiana, it's extraordinarily expensive, or New York. So if you want to be a shepherd or a sheep producer or cattle producer, you got to have money to start with. But if you graze a solar site, you get access to land, which really kind of cuts and overcomes that challenge dramatically. So one of the earliest solar grazers, she lives in New Jersey. She has 5 acres and 1,000 sheep because they're all sustained on solar. And that kind of answering that question, what generally happens here for solar systems, what we call solar sites, these big utility scale solar sites, or even the smaller ones, generally speaking, a landowner will lease out that land to a solar company. The solar company does not often buy the land. They lease it to the solar company. The solar company puts in the solar array and owns all the equipment for a 30 or 40-year lease. And then the solar company is responsible for managing vegetation under it. So the solar company will then contract with the sheep farmer and all that good stuff. And so that's usually what the arrangement that's happening is an outside sheep rancher coming in to do agriculture on a solar site. Sometimes the landowner will also want to do it, but not as frequently, although it's becoming more common. And primary reason being, like, if you're making $2,000 an acre for leasing out to the solar company, like $2,000 an acre per year, say 1,000 acres, that's, good amount of money. The sheep grazing fee might be $300 or $400 an acre. And it's a lot of work to graze sheep on a solar site versus that $2,000 per acre fee. That's all free money, or it's not free. You're not doing anything for it. So there's a little kind of incentive to if you have a solar lease, you're already making a good amount of money. But there are some folks who want to do it because they want to stay in agriculture and it's really important to them. And I want to emphasize here at this point that right now 70% of all lamb in the United States is imported from Australia and New Zealand primarily. So most of the lamb that's eaten in the United States is imports. And it's incredible to see one agricultural industry so dominated by imports. It's remarkable. So there's a huge opportunity to increase domestic supply here. And there's also lamb demand is going up in the United States, specifically from immigrants from Africa, Middle East, Latin America, who want different type of lamb, and their demand can't really be fulfilled through imports as easily. So there's an increase in domestic lamb demand for sure, or demand for lamb domestically. Again, this emphasizes just like the incredible opportunity this is for farmers to diversify their income, or if they're doing solar grazing full time and doing a lot of kind of large sites, this can be their main business, raising sheep on solar sites. It's pretty remarkable. And then I'll drop some case studies in the chat, but I'll highlight one here from Texas. This is Chad Rains. He's a 4th generation cotton farmer from La Mesa, Texas, or La Mesa, in the Panhandle. And he took over his farm, struggled to keep the farm profitably growing cotton. So he had a lot of issues, really, like the cotton he was doing organically. trying to make it work and just couldn't make it financially work. He actually has a degree in finance. He worked at a bank for a while his dad was finishing, before his dad transitioned away from farming and Chad took over. So he turned to sheep and then eventually to solar grazing to save that kind of family farm. And it worked out dramatically because there's so much opportunity in Texas. And so he grazes somewhere around, I think, more than 10,000 acres right now. And he only started 2 years ago. I remember he joined our webinars in 2023, just didn't have any sheep on solar sites. And then within a year or so, kind of figured out how to do it, got trained, and is grazing a whole bunch now. And his sons are working with him as well, and he hopes to pass it on to the next generation. And he says, it's thanks to solar grazing that I have a chance to do something outside the box and a chance to save the family farm. So really, it does save the family farm. There's another case study which you can read about. I won't go into detail, but this is Ryan Indart. He's a grazer from California, third generation shepherd. His grandfather or great grandfather immigrated from Basque Country. And solar grazing, I mean, he was in the sheep industry before that. It goes back, generations. And, he almost lost his farm in 2018, his ranch. He would have had to move out of state, out of California to try and keep going. And solar grazing is what saved him. And I'll highlight that he's in California, so he grazes a lot of acres for fire prevention and mitigation. And they do grazing completely differently under solar panels there than they do in Texas, but it's a cool story. So you can read about it in there. So you probably want to hear some numbers about the landscape of solar grazing, how widespread it is. And so you get a couple of things. One is the majority of grazers are actually a little bit younger, so you kind of fit into this 30 to 60-year-old range. A lot of these grazers are grazing kind of the large solar sites, we call utility scale solar sites. A third of, so this comes from a census that ASGA did in 2024 about, all the solar grazers that we could get in touch with. And I guess I should mention in the beginning, but pretty much all solar grazers who are active right now are members of ASGA, and most people trying to do it are members of ASGA. And a lot of the solar companies involved in this are also members of ASGA. So we bring those two sides together. But of the solar grazers that we got in our census, a third of them are female, which is great considering how the percentage of, male to female ratio in farming is generally. And most of them, use kind of a mix. They're using sheep grazing. They're trying to use sheep grazing primarily, and then the mowing is supplemental. And then the numbers. So right now it's in 30 states, although actually it's more than 30 states. This is as of 2024. 130,000 acres of solar. So if you turn that into gigawatts, because the solar industry works in gigawatts, and then you calculate based on SEIA, the trade association for the solar industry, based on their numbers for how much ground-mounted solar there is in the United States, so solar over grass or desert, that's somewhere around 10-ish% of all of that ground-mounted solar in the United States has sheep on it right now, which is remarkable. It's a huge percentage of the solar industry, and it's growing. I bet these numbers are out of date right now. It's a year later, and I know many of these grazers have signed more lease, and new grazers have come on, and there are more sheep out there doing it. And how does this distribute across the country? Solar grazing started a lot in the Northeast, but mainly on these small sites. You'll see Northeast has about 145 sites, but only 4,000 acres. Now compare it to the South, which includes Texas in this geographic distribution, 87,000 acres, but fewer sites, 109 sites. Because Texas, they're doing on these big sites, 200 acres, 500 acres, 1,000 acres. They're getting up to 2,000, 6,000 acres. There's a site in Indiana that's going to be 13,000 acres when it's finished. So really big sites. And the why? Well, two reasons. One is there are a lot more sheep in Texas. It's traditionally a sheep growing state. Same with California. So there's a lot of grazing in California too. A lot of sheep out there being grazing solar sites. But the main reason is in Texas and California, they've been able to build big solar sites. Same with North Carolina and Virginia, bigger solar sites. Northeast, it's harder to build big solar sites. One, because of the density of the rural population, and two, because of permitting issues, local communities fighting back against large sites. Same in the Midwest, although we're seeing a lot more bigger sites being built in the Midwest now. Some really big ones are coming online there, although a lot of them are also being defeated or blocked. So Midwest, we're going to see a lot of growth in solar grazing on big sites there, but it's going to depend on that political situation, how many of these sites actually get built, some of which solar grazing will contribute to, and agrivoltaics will contribute to. In some instances, that won't even be enough to get sites permitted. So we can talk more, I guess, in the discussion period about these political issues. But yeah, right now Texas is leading the way. And the total number in Texas, we have about 68,000 acres of solar sites in Texas are being grazed, so a little over half in that survey. And then the number of sheep right there is about 37,000. Part of that is because some of those sites, they're going to be grazing less than one sheep per acre, depending on what the vegetation is, and depending on how much like supplemental mowing they need to do. But yeah, basically Texas is leading the way. The West is behind it, so California mostly. And then the Northeast and Midwest, I think we're going to see a lot of growth there, but it's still on the smaller scale. And that's one of the things I want to have as a takeaway here. This works on very small sites, like 1 megawatt, 7, 8 acres, or it works really great on large sites, and the economy of scales for the grazer is actually better on large sites. Here are some examples from Texas. Horizon Solar in Pearsall, Texas. That's the one that I showed the photo of in the beginning. It's my background behind me too. That's about 400 acres, and Eli Valdez grazes it with about 3,000 sheep, depending on the time of year. And I think he might have changed the sheep numbers this year, but yeah, big site out near San Antonio, large grazing operation there. A couple other ones, Stampede Solar, left off the E. Stampede Solar, this is in Sulphur Springs, about 2 hours east of the Metroplex, or an hour east of the Metroplex. It's about 3,000 acres total. This one they're doing 400 acres of hay production on, and there's also quite a bit of wild wetland in there. And the actual array itself is about 2,000 acres. And J.R. Howard from Texas Solar Sheep is grazing that site. And this picture is from that site. It's really great. And the solar company is a company called NL. Oh, the Horizon Solar Company is Leeward Renewable Energy, LRE. They're based actually in Texas, or in Dallas. Their headquarters is right in Dallas. This one, Stampede, is an L, and then Blue Jay Solar is another NL. It's in Iola, right by College Station, and it's another 1,400-acre site, and it's being grazed by Morgan and Kate Hodges, who you saw in the video. There's a little son Weston. They're really great young farmers. They won National Farm Bureau Young Ranchers and Farmer of the Year. So really great, ambitious couple doing amazing work. So, but these big sites you can check out in Texas have grazing on them. There's plenty more than that, but I just want to highlight those. I talked about lamb production already, so just remember 70% of lamb consumed in the U.S. is imported. That's insane. We have an opportunity to produce more domestic lamb here. And then what about crops and cattle? This is a question that always comes up. So ASGA is always focused on sheep grazing because that's where all this stuff started, but we're also trying to build out the technical assistance capacity and education around non-sheep grazing, non-sheep forms of agriculture. And right now the industry is very nascent in that. So there's a lot of research being done onto crops and cattle. Rutgers has some really great experiments into both on small sites. University of Minnesota has been doing dairy cattle under solar panels, but it's very small, like less than a megawatt, since 2019. And Arizona State's done some cool research. Ohio State's doing some research right now as well. And there's some big sites coming out in Ohio. They'll probably have some crops in addition to sheep on it. And there's some other small scale stuff. Hay, although hay, as you saw, isn't so small scale anymore on some of these sites. But a lot of the hay that's being done on solar sites is not being done between the panels. It's being done outside the fence line or in different parts of the site where the array isn't located. There's a cut flower site in New York, a very small one that has cut flowers under solar panels, or between the rows, I should say. So there's a lot of cool stuff people are doing, but all these are like a megawatt or less, maybe 2 megawatts at most. So very small operations. Same with the cattle for the most part. There's some cattle in Massachusetts on a solar site. And the main reason it's cost prohibitive to scale up. So the main fear with cattle is that they're going to rub up against the piles and damage the panels. So the general wisdom is you'll have to raise the panels to like 8 or 9 feet off the ground to accommodate cattle, which if you're building a 100 megawatt or 1,000 acre site, or 2,000 acre site, the amount of additional cost for all that steel, I've heard somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars range for a big site. So just cost prohibitive is what the main problem right now. Same with crops. You'd have to kind of space out the rows, maybe raise the panel, figure out how to get the equipment in there. And then you have to find a commercial incentive for the farmer to do it, right? Because it's a lot harder to graze sheep under solar panels. It's a lot harder to raise crops under solar panels. So why would you do it under solar panels and do all this extra work for that? And it's it doesn't quite have the same commercial incentive that sheep grazing does under solar panels yet. So that's an issue to get over in addition to all the design elements of it. I know one of the questions is how do you get started? And I think, yeah, we're about up to 11. So I'll probably just wrap up kind of quickly, but I'll just so we can have time for questions, but I'll say a couple of things real fast. Emphasize that thing about the grazers get paid. And the reason they get paid is it's a lot of work to provide this service to a solar company. It's so much easier to put livestock on pasture and rotationally graze them and just raise them versus you now have to put them onto a solar site. Generally speaking, the way you graze a solar site is you break it into different sections using temporary electric fencing, and then you have to manage around all this equipment. And you're signing a contract with the solar company as a rancher, and they're saying you have to keep the vegetation at 18 inches or 20 inches or whatever year round. So you have to do that. And so that's a lot of work, and it's not easy.
Hey,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, Kevin, a question. So you've got the side of the contract that talks about, okay, you have to keep the vegetation controlled to this amount. I'm wondering about the vegetation itself, because there's the other side of the equation that says, well, what's planted there, and is it providing enough of a food load for the sheep as well? Kind of how is that managed? You mentioned when a new site comes in, it might take a few years to establish it, and is it always going to work best with the biodiverse natives, or does somebody have to go in there and my God, try to put irrigation under solar, etc.
Yeah, great question. Fantastic. We can move into questions now, and I'll just kind of answer that and also deal with this kind of, that's kind of the essential thing about, okay, solar sites and what is under those panels and how does that work, both with not just with sheep farming, but with other things like erosion control and biodiversity and pollinators. So most solar sites that are grazed right now were built without ever thinking about sheep or animals on it. So they have whatever was in there, which could have been just a general seed mix that's, plants that are meant to help with preventing erosion control, which you've probably seen. There's some solar sites near DFW and that blackland kind of prairie soil that have had some big erosion issues because they didn't really understand what they were doing or they just didn't have, it's just difficult to work in that soil, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So anyways, that is to say that, so most sheep are put on solar sites that just have whatever vegetation mix was there, whether there's a pollinator mix in places like Minnesota that have like incentives for pollinators or requirements for pollinators, or where there's just a general, seed mix for erosion control and general cover under those panels. And so the sheep are great and they can eat a lot of different stuff. And as long as you rotationally graze them and make them eat the stuff they don't like as much, but are still palatable to them, then they can do it. And they work on a wide variety of seed mixes and vegetation. And anything they don't get, you'll deal with mowing and things like that. But there's a lot of nuance there. And now that solar grazing has taken off, a lot of sites are being developed with sheep in mind, and they're talking to the farmer 3 years before the site's built to talk about that seed mix. And now they're trying to balance out those seed mixes with stuff that's really nutritious for the sheep, as well as meets those erosion control demands and meets whatever pollinator requirements they have. And with that, I mean, when a sheep grazer is on site, they're going to be caring for their animals very carefully, and they might have to use supplemental nutrition like minerals and salts is pretty common, especially in some of these sites that don't have great vegetation. And in the winter months in Texas, they'll usually have to give supplemental feed with hay just because there's not much growing right then. And if you're in the Northwest, Northeast, or Midwest, you oftentimes bring the sheep off site during the winter months after the grazing season ends, and then you figure out what to do with it. But yeah, there's so much, and we have tons of webinars recorded about this, and we continue to talk about it, but there's so much that is difficult about that seeding process on solar sites, and then what actually gets planted when they build it, and then what comes up after it's built. So this is in Indiana. This picture right here, it's a solar site that has a pretty intense pollinator mix on it. I can't remember exactly what's in it, and I'm the worst at remembering animal species, or plant species. But when we were there in the summertime, when this picture was taken, it was pretty much all clover was coming up. So you might have an expensive pollinator mix on a solar site with 20 or 30 different species and like 6 dominate. And it depends on management and care and things like that. Um, and if it was, former pasture land beforehand, and you plant a mix that has a good mix of things for sheep and erosion control and things like that, you can graze it pretty well from the beginning. But if it was former cropland, it's been monocropped, the soil's depleted, and it's taking a little while for things to get established. You have a lot of weeds come through. So that's another thing, right? When they build these solar sites, they're pretty much they do their best to keep to not disturb the land as much as possible, but they're building a power plant. So they turn it over, they put a new seed mix in, and once the solar site comes online and the seed mix is getting established, what comes up first, it's going to be all the weeds that have been waiting there. Texas to get like some bad mesquite and things like that. So you're in the situation where maybe you're coming on a solar site, you're just going to have to be mowing or spraying that mesquite or or whatever local weed is there. Initially, you might have to control it more intensively using not just sheep but other means, and then you can't quite put as many sheep out there because one, there might not be enough nutritious forage in that first year or two, because you're establishing some pollinator species and you don't want the sheep pulling the seed head off. So you might be so there's just kind of a lot of dynamics that go into it. And even with mowing, sometimes they'll plant some pollinator seed mixes on solar sites where in order for that plant to flower, it will have to grow above the height of the panels, which means they have to mow it before it can flower because they can't be blocking the energy production. So there's a lot of back and forth there. I want to emphasize one thing real fast that's really difficult for this, one of the big challenges for solar grazers. One is, how do you get in touch with a solar company is really hard because these companies are massive. Sometimes a company will have thousands of sheep on sites in California, and their East Coast arm of that company will have no idea that they're grazing sheep. So you might be a New York grazer going to some company and be like, hey, I heard you have sheep on a solar site in California. We'd love to put sheep on the site in New York. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're never going to graze sheep on a solar site. And then they find out from their West Coast colleagues that they've been doing it for years. So they're huge. Also, the siting timeline for a site is really long. It can take up to 5 years before a site begins construction. Construction and commissioning takes a couple of years, and usually there's delays. So if you're a solar grazer, you see a site going up, a mile from your house, you're like, great, I'll reach out to that company. And they're like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll be finished end of 2026. Let's sign a contract, and we'll say spring of 2027, you can get on there with your sheep. And then comes to February 2027, they're like, yeah, this construction is delayed. We think a month, maybe 2 months. So maybe we'll get them on in June. Come back in June, they're like, yeah, it's looking like September. So this happens to sheep grazers a lot. It's very frustrating, and it's just a lot of delay goes on. And the other thing I'll say here is that when a site is developed, meaning they design and get the permit for it, that could be one company that then passes off to another company. And then a construction company will build the site, and the actual owner and operator of the site could be a completely third or fourth or fifth company. And it could change hands multiple times before the site's even constructed. And then once it changes hand, you have the solar asset owner who owns the site. They might hire a third company to manage the site. And so as a sheep grazer, it's hard to figure out who you're contracting with and who you're engaging with. And that is one of the things that ASGA spends a lot of time trying to help people out. Lots more to talk about, but we can just follow through questions now at this point.
Hey, I've got a question. You mentioned just a moment earlier, you mentioned a little bit about rotation, and you said something about electric fences. So is what typically happens if it's a large site is that it's separated into separate subsites, and the sheep are only allowed to go on part of that for a certain amount of time so that they don't graze it too low, and then they're moved around. Is that what happens?
Yeah, exactly. If you imagine, I don't have the site design pictures on here, unfortunately, but yeah, a site, if it's 1,000 acres, your solar grazer, so it'll be 1,000, say it's 1,000, the actual array of solar panels is 1,000 acres within, they'll have an exterior perimeter fence that the solar company has to put up because of the power plant. And so that's the array. The sheep grazer will go in with electric fencing, usually like some sort of poly wire or electric netting, and they will fence out, say, like 40 acres of it and put all their sheep on that 40 acres. And then they'll fence out the next 40 acres and they'll move through it and they'll graze the whole site. Sometimes the sheep grazer is responsible for the acres outside the fence too, because the solar company will oftentimes have to lease more than the actual array will take up. And sometimes there'll be wetlands, sometimes there'll just be a buffer, sometimes they'll just the only way they can get a farmer to sign the lease. So yeah.
Okay, so they might, depending on the season, the sheep might be in one area for what, a month, and then they move to another area for a month, or something of that nature. And then in the winter, maybe they're not grazed at all because it's not growing.
Yeah, exactly. So the rotational grazing that generally will happen on a solar site is you'll keep the sheep in one section for as little as a day, sometimes a few days,
Okay.
sometimes a few weeks if it's the site, depending on the vegetation in there. And then yeah, you'll rotate them around. And in Texas, they will stay on site pretty much year round, and keep rotating around the sites. In the Midwest and Northeast, they take them off the solar sites when the grazing season ends in late November, early December, and bring them back again in March or April when the grazing season starts up again. Sheep are, they grow wool, so they'd be fine on the solar sites during the winter outside. And usually, if they're taking them off the solar sites, they're still going to have them outside somewhere. It's just more of a PR issue where the solar companies are afraid that if they have sheep out there in snow, they're going to animal control calls and things like that from local communities. Um,
Okay.
but from an animal
So
welfare
they do
perspective,
I saw the trucks earlier, so they do, they do move them around, the trailers. They do move them around from time to time quite often. So most of the sheep people are going to have their own trailers, or they're gonna have some other company come in to move their sheep.
yeah, so a lot
Something
of
of that
times
nature.
they'll have their own trailer. So like this operation here, this is a couple from Minnesota, and they primarily grade smaller sites, so something that's in the 20 or 30 acre range to maybe 50 or 60 acres. And so their situation is different. They'll be grazing that site only the whole site, probably for a month or two out of the year, and they'll move their sheep to the next site. So they're trailing their sheep a lot between these smaller sites. On a bigger site, you tend to leave that flock around there most of the year, if not all the year. But you still have to sometimes either bring in more sheep or you're taking sheep out to be sold for lamb. And so you either have your own trailers, for big operations, you need really big trailers, or you can contract, if you're in a part of the country where there's people are moving animals a lot, you can contract with a person who specializes in transporting livestock. So yeah, but a lot of people have their own trailer.
And how many sheep per acre? I mean, it changes over time, but if you had 1,000 acre tract, how many sheep would be involved? Would this be
Yeah.
quite a few sheep, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's one of the things that it varies based on the vegetation. So in Texas, you're probably thinking about one ewe, so one female sheep, we call one ewe, per acre throughout most of the year is what they do, or sometimes less if they're in like the drier parts of the state going towards West Texas. In the Northeast or Midwest, you might on average have 3 to 4 ewes, sheep per acre. And then in spring rainfall, in theory, you might need 6 or 7 sheep per acre. So that's why you have the supplemental mowing, because if you were to say bring in 7 sheep per acre for just a month in the spring, that's 7,000 sheep on 1,000 acres. Now you have to move those 3,000 sheep off the site once that time's over and get your rate back down to 4,000 sheep. So where are you going to put those 3,000 sheep? If you got other solar sites that are big, you can probably move them around. Or if you have a big home farm, you put them back. But if you don't, you have nowhere to put them. So a lot of times people will maintain that 4,000 sheep, so 4 sheep per acre number, and just do a passive mowing to help, one passive mowing to help it so you don't have to buy more sheep. But it's a growing industry, it's changing. I think the ideal going forward is to do as much of that with sheep as possible and eliminate supplemental mowing as much as possible. And one of the big challenges in the Midwest and Northeast and other parts of the country is there's just not a big sheep population. So you have to move those sheep out of Texas or other parts of the country and then make them kind of localized to be able to handle the local climate.
So it looks like MSYSA has a question.
Yeah, hi, that's me. For some reason, that has kind of like my email. I don't know. I guess I'll have to change that. But this is Yvonne. Anyways, I saw the flowers and the talk about pollinators. Have they ever thought of putting like beekeepers there or bee things? And I don't know how much money you make off of honey. I know that it's not cheap, and I know a lot of people use it because it's supposedly healthier than sugar. And have they ever thought about that? Or maybe, I don't know. Well, if it's sheep and the honey stuff, that could be a problem, but maybe they could put a specific section like within the electric fence and let people put their bees there. Because I know some beekeepers, I don't know, they use sugar water, and I don't think that makes the best honey. And I know it's bad for like the butterflies because, they need the natural stuff, but they're not getting it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So they call them solar apiaries. So putting an apiary on a solar site or a beehive on a solar site is a great thing to do, and a lot of sites do it. They don't usually, so most solar sites again will have some part of the lease will be outside of the fence, and that's usually where they'll put the beehives. And a solar site can support quite a few beehives depending on what the vegetation is and what the vegetation around it is, like what's the food for the bees around it, and if they have a good pollinator species. So it's happening a lot. Yeah, and it's becoming more common. It's just an easy thing to do, especially if you already have pollinators on the solar site. And then bees and sheep aren't a problem. The more the issue is if you have a lot of pollinator species in the vegetation, you have to kind of manage the sheep in a particular way where they're not going to disrupt the growth of those wildflowers and bring them in at certain times. But it's the same problem you'd have with mowing. So you're not really any different from sheep. You just have to do it right. And then there's some pollinator species that aren't as palatable to sheep, and you just have to think about those when you're making your seed mix.
Yeah, or maybe the bees would have it. And I know the bees now, they use the whole thing. They use the bee wax and stuff like that. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honey is it's a hugely important form of agriculture. So they produce a lot of honey, and they can turn into mead, solar honey, solar lamb. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, there's a apiarist, a beekeeper in Virginia, not far from Charlottesville, who we went on her site. She makes just beekeeping on a solar site, and then she makes mead too. It's really good mead.
Hmm.
Hey Kevin, this is Michael Fladmark. I have a question. I actually invited a landowner from Anderson County, which is East Texas, who has an interest in developing property in an agrivoltaic manner. And they understand the timeline as far as developing the property and everything. But it's not a large property, it's a small property. And they're interested in developing it as like a community solar project to the nearby town of Natchez. And they're also in a co-op, Trinity Valley Energy Co-op. And so my question to you is, owners of small properties like this is like 120 acres, really only about 15 acres to 20 acres are available to develop. So that's about 15 megawatts if you can be real optimist. And they're nearby, there is a substation nearby to be able to get on the line and everything like that. But as far as the viability of developing a project like that, we'd like to be able to visit with you offline next week if possible and talk about the project overall. But can you give us some guidance at this point?
Yeah, happy to chat about it. We can set up a Zoom call and talk about it. But yeah, I think yeah, so in terms of like a smaller site like that, 15 megawatts, it's so far much of the non-sheep-based agrivoltaics would occur on kind of a smaller scale, so that would be interesting for it. And you could maybe even cool to do like a mix of like sheep or cattle and crops if you can make it work. Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it, depending on what you're interested in. If it's sheep, it's really the main issue is finding a developer who's going to develop the site and then working out an agreement with them in that contract that there will be sheep grazing on the site, or working on the contract that there will be agrivoltaics, and then what kind of agrivoltaics you want on it. And this is the part where you have the most leverage before that contract's signed, because if your property is a good property for solar, meaning like you said, it's close to that transmission line, it's kind of fits into their economic models, which is what they're always worried about. Then you can get that. Usually, it's just a case of finding a company that's going to develop there and willing to sign the contract that says you want agrivoltaics on it, and then define it as much as you can, whether that's trying to work on a system for whether it's just sheep, which is, you don't really have to make many modifications, if any at all, or whether you want to modify the site design to accommodate crops or cattle. And then there's a whole bunch of different folks working on that, and I can connect you guys to different resources on that if that's the direction you want to go. But the sheep is pretty simple. I would get that in the contract, and so it's in there already. And it's cool if it's co-op. I mean, there's interesting ideas like, getting honey on the site, producing honey for the local co-op would be cool. Or even, using some of the lamb for the local co-op if there's a way to process it for that. Or if you do like a small community garden within it would be also fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some cool ideas you can do.
I'm going to hand you over to the owner of the property.
Hello, thank you for having me. So I did want to know, with the sheep, is that on the owner to, I guess, get the contract for the sheep grazing to come out there, or does the solar company set all of that up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'd say in the vast majority of cases, the solar company is in charge of that because they're in charge of the land management and managing vegetation under the solar panels. So even though it's your land, you're leasing it out to the company. The company is going to be owning the solar array under that it's on, and then they're going to be in charge of all that property. So they would contract, or sometimes they outsource it to a third-party management company who then contracts with the sheep rancher. However, a couple of things to keep in mind. If you're a landowner who's going to sign a lease for a solar site, look into that lease very carefully to see what your access rights are. Like sometimes companies will sign contracts with landowners where the landowner can only get into the solar site with like a certain amount of, like 24 or 48 hours or like weeks written permission, like requests for permission to access their own land.
Yes.
So that kind of stuff happens. And then you can write into the contract where the landowner gets the first right of refusal or is the only one who can graze sheep on a solar site or whatever livestock if you're going to do a different route. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The landowners can, because they have leverage, get that. But also keep in mind, you want to make sure that you want to do that. You want to be grazing sheep on the solar site, be the one doing it, rather than letting someone else from the outside come in.
I'm also here with my wife, Christiana. I was wanting to know, are the fees associated with all the permitting and I guess anything involving the city or the jurisdiction, are those handled by the solar company or would that be on the owner?
Well, I think depends. I guess depends on your situation because you guys might be looking at a different model. But I'd say the standard model it seems to be that the solar company, because they're getting that lease, they're going to build the array and everything. They handle all the permitting, all the issues with this county, and then if there generally speaking will be a change in like the tax on the land, and what they'll do is they'll oftentimes basically the company will pay the difference in like taxes caused by having a solar array on there, but usually the company just does all that. If you're in a situation where you own your farm and you're building an array on your farm yourself, and you're not, say having a solar company like own and manage it, then that's like a different deal, which you'd probably be more responsible for all that stuff.
Thanks a lot. We'll follow up with you after the meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. And I dropped a link in the chat to Jack's Solar Garden. They're based in Colorado. They're like a very small farm that turned into a solar site, and they do a lot of small scale like vegetable or used to be vegetable farming, some cattle, some berries and things like that. And they I think for a while were selling their produce to like a local co-op. So that's kind of a cool model you guys can look into. They made it work because and this is kind of I'll say this kind of bluntly, but they made it work because they had a lot of subsidies. Honestly, they got a lot of like grants and things like that to make it happen. With sheep grazing, it can be profitable on a solar site. Crops and things like that currently isn't quite profitable, or at least on the small scale, no one's figuring out how to make it profitable. So that's one caveat to Jack's, but really cool. Jack's Solar Garden in Colorado, really cool operation. You should check it out. And if you're ever in that area, I think it's outside of Denver, just go check them out. They're cool. They do a lot of tours. Yeah, I see it's Bob, right? You're on.
I had another quick question here. Okay, you know how you're saying they have third-party people that manage the solar agriculture thing with the lambs or the sheep and stuff like that. So, yeah, so what are they like? I forgot the word mediator, or they kind of connect people, and is there a lot of them? And are there any like I guess there's no rules or anything being written, right? Is there a lot of legal stuff around it yet, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a confusing thing. It takes a while to kind of tease through, I know, for people, so I apologize for kind of uh throwing a lot of things at you guys. But just the one thing to keep in mind for sure is that generally speaking, the sheep farmer who's going to be grazing sheep on a solar site is probably not going to be the landowner, and they'll sign a contract. They call it a master service agreement, basically saying that they're going to bring their sheep to a solar site and they'll take care of vegetation. And that contract will often be signed with the solar company. What is confusing about the solar industry, and this is just getting into the weeds a little bit, but the solar industry, you can have a solar company that owns a solar site. So they own the solar array. They're not owning the land, they own the solar array. And they're based, say they own a solar site in, somewhere in Sulphur Springs, right? But they're based in Denver. They'll be the asset owners, they own the array, and they may never visit that solar site, and they may hire a different company, they call an operations and maintenance company, to manage all the maintenance, manage all the land on that solar site. And that solar company that owns that proper power plant, owns the power that they're selling to the grid, may never go there. And that operations and maintenance company would then be the company that would contract with the sheep raiser, the sheep farmer. So sometimes you have the solar company does its own kind of maintenance and operations, and they'll contract directly with the sheep farmer. Sometimes there'll be this third party, and
So are there any good third-party people out there yet? And would you want to be one?
Well, I mean, so the operation and maintenance business is a booming one because there's a lot of solar sites that need to be maintained, and a lot of companies that, despite owning them, don't want to do it or just aren't set up to do it. So there is a big industry for operations and maintenance, and it's confusing. It gets really complicated. But for sheep farmers, usually it's one person's independent sheep farmer. Sometimes they'll get really big, like that person JR I mentioned. He has tons of acres, or Eli, tons of acres, has a lot of employees. Sometimes they'll just be one person grazing a couple of sites or one big site. But generally the sheep rancher is going to be an independent person, kind of trying to make their business work.
Okay.
Tony has a question.
How is water handled on solar grazing sites?
Yeah, water is the big. Oh, sorry, go ahead. You're still asking your question.
No, did you hear he had questions about the water on the site?
Yeah, so water is a big issue for sure. It's what happens is if there's no water on site, and again, a lot of these sites weren't developed with sheep in mind. If there's no water or access on site, then you have to haul it in, and that can be a big part of your labor costs as a sheep rancher, as a solar grazer. But nowadays, as developers increasingly are making sites with sheep in mind, we usually tell them to try and at least get a well if they can, or some sort of water access. And the thing to know about solar development is when they're building a site, which could cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, they have lots of money for capital expenditures. So paying $30,000 for a well isn't a huge part of their budget. But once that site is operational, they have a certain amount of money that they can spend on operations, and it's very, very tightly controlled in order to make profit off the power they're selling. So at that point, doing any sort of capital changes to a site, like adding a well or adding additional fencing, if it's not, is probably not going to happen because they just don't have the budget for it. So during that development construction phase is when they have all the money to spend on things like that. But yeah, usually you got to keep the sheep with water. And that's why oftentimes the solar grazers are on site almost every day or several times a week. And I see there's a question from Jeff in the chat about preferable ground cover that hits the sweet spot between pollination, sheep grazing, and things like that. So we worked with a company in the Northeast called Ernst Seed to make the Fuzz and Buzz seed mix, which is a good one that has a good mix of sheep nutrition plants, erosion control plants, and pollinators. And it's kind of geared at the Northeast. But every every state and every region will have different kind of plants that will work well for that area, for the sheep, for the pollinators and erosion and all the other things you need. So we always encourage solar companies to work with the local grazer, your local extension specialist, and your local seed suppliers and things like that. And that it'll just vary too much. And the sheep will eat a lot of different things. So what you want to kind of figure out the plant that the sheep are going to eat that's really gonna hold well in your area. The other part of his question is what additional support is needed for the sheep on the solar site? Is there a calculation of the number of sheep to acres, amount of time on the site for the sheep? So yeah, we talked about the number of acres and time on the site. And yeah, you just generally speaking, you're going to have people monitoring the sheep pretty often, looking not only to move them around, but the big issue on animal health is parasites. So you want to make sure you're preventing parasites, hoof issues, especially in wet areas, and then predation, so coyotes. And you want to make sure you have like livestock guardian dogs or other ways to prevent predators from getting your sheep.
Ooh.
Yeah, and the worst is if you're kind of near a suburban area, if you get a dog that escapes from a house, or if someone just doesn't, keep their dog inside the fence and they get in the solar site, because the coyote will take a lamb or two for eating. A dog getting into an area with sheep is going to have fun, so they're going to be out there and they're going to attack a lot of them. So because for them it's like play, it's not like they're not doing it for food. So those are like the dogs are like actually the worst. So that's why you have to have predator fencing or livestock guardian dogs or other prevention methods.
I have a question in regards to the cost to develop these types of solar projects. And so you have basically two kinds of operations. One, like what we're looking at, is a small operation, whereas in the ones that you presented were primarily 1,000 acres and above. And so there's definitely a difference in the cost to build those different types of projects. Do you have some economics associated with the metrics, such as maybe dollar per acre or dollar per megawatt, or as far as what for doing the sheep grazing and solar development?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, so I did focus a lot on the bigger sites, but solar grazing really took off on smaller sites initially, and it works really well on those sites too. The economics work better for the sheep grazer on big sites because you're not transporting sheep as much, and that's a labor cost. But for developing a site for agrivoltaics, what are the costs? I don't have a ton of good data just because it's new, and then companies are kind of keep things a little bit close to the vest sometimes. But for developing a site for sheep grazing, you oftentimes don't have the cost difference isn't going to be very much from just developing a normal site. There are recommendations we make for site designs that are kind of small fixes, and some of them do cost money. But you can put sheep on a site that wasn't designed for sheep at all, and they'll be fine, generally speaking. But if you are going to make some design changes for a solar site, something like putting a well in or certain modifications to the fencing or to the cables, things like that, that'll cost a little bit of money. The sheep grazing can usually make up for that by saving, because it's going to reduce the amount of labor the sheep farmer is going to put into grazing the site. It'll reduce the yearly vegetation management cost. So where you probably make that money back through the operations cost over 30 to 35 years of a project, or even within a few years sometimes. So I don't have any hard numbers for you on that because it's still evolving and there's still like a lot of data that's private. But for sheep grazing, yeah, I think you can make the argument pretty fairly that a lot of places you can do some minor capital expenditures, like minor relative to the cost of the whole project, that will save you money in operations. And all these companies want to save money in operations. For cattle or crops, not much has been done in that realm, and I think both of those will require quite a bit more costs to develop and build a site to accommodate them. And if someone can figure out how to do that without increasing the cost much, then you'll have tons of cattle and tons of crops on solar sites in the US. But that's why you have a lot of sheep and not a lot of crops and cattle yet, because you just don't have to spend as much money. To be honest, spend very much money to build a site for sheep.
This is Randy, and it's sort of a follow-up to Tony's question about the water. Do you have enough guess, longitudinal data to when you're looking at that ground cover mix, I noticed that you've got both the stationary arrays, and when it showed the cattle, they were stationary, but yet the small sheep ones all appear to be the one axis. And it would seem, you mentioned Blackland Prairie, so you're familiar with the ground that's underneath your feet here in North Texas, but the question is kind of generic to any part of the country. Do you have longitudinal data that says, well, you know, the things with the deep roots, and we actually can control for seasons where there wasn't as much precipitation better because there is solar there? So in other words, is there any data that says either we change the seed mix or we somehow, you know, improve the viability, even if it's native plants as opposed to crop, to generate the vegetation because there's solar there?
Gotcha. So great question. So just on the solar side, just putting aside sheep and agrivoltaics, there's been a lot of research done, and I'll have to maybe dig some things up and just email it to you guys after, about the microclimates that develop underneath the panels. Because oftentimes in kind of hotter places, especially drier and hotter places, but not just there, you'll have more moisture retention underneath the solar panels because they're blocking the sun a little bit, depending on how transparent they are. They're blocking the sun. So you actually might get, in certain cases, there's studies showing you have more vegetation growth underneath the panels and kind of richer vegetation because of that, that's blocking the sun a little bit and the moisture under it. And that's true of the single axis trackers that move kind of going back and forth, as well as the fixed tilt. And there's different data on it. I couldn't spout any of it off the top of my head, but there's a lot of interesting stuff on it that it can have improvements for vegetation and potentially for some crops in certain areas of the country, especially in places like Texas where it can get hotter and drier. And that also, on the flip side, creates a bit of a vegetation maintenance problem because sometimes things grow faster under the panels, and so you got to mow it more quickly or more often, or graze it more often with sheep. So that happens with the sheep grazing. ASGA did some research in the Northeast that just came out showing kind of like the soil benefits and biodiversity benefits from grazing on a site versus mowing. But the main thing I think for land impact would be that microclimate under the panels and the fact that you have a company that's managing a big piece of land, and if they're taking land stewardship seriously, they can do a lot to restore the soil, including grazing on it. So if you have monocropped land, you can do a lot. But yeah, I don't have a more in-depth answer than that, but there is that microclimate work is really interesting, and it does affect a lot of the vegetation and stuff like that under solar panels.
This is Michael again. Now this focuses on the solar panels themselves. And so recently, well, within the last couple of years, Europe has, in their agrivoltaics programs, they've gone to vertical paneling, like fencing, where they have bifacial modules producing, to solar noon every day on both sides of the panel and everything. And is there an interest by any developers in the United States for trying to do something similar, develop those types of projects that you're using solar vertical instead of like single axis? The photograph you had in the very beginning, or a couple of them, they almost looked vertical. I mean, they were probably up north where you had to have a more sharp angle in order to catch to have the maximum production. But have y'all started looking at that as opportunities?
Yeah, so that's also a really cool subject. So I dropped a link first off to that study that ASGA did about soil benefits, and then Rutgers, one of the research projects I mentioned before, has 3 arrays that they're testing out various things, and one of them, I believe, one of them is one of the vertical bifacial panels created by a German company called Sunzon, I think is their name. And that's a really cool experiment. And Europe is so the United States is way ahead in terms of sheep agrivoltaics, and every other form of agrivoltaics, Europe is way ahead of us. And a lot of that comes to local regulations and how solar is permitted in the country, and there's in the continent and different parts of the continent. Some of it I think is cumbersome, and some of it's actually great because you get really cool agrivoltaics out there. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but they have way more experimental stuff. those vertical panels. Sorry, what? Oh, but I can maybe actually, I'll pull up a picture of those vertical solar panels, see if we can find a good image so I can kind of illustrate what we're talking about. But yeah, here, let me
Remember to share again.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. And here we go. So these are this is the Next to Sun system right here on the right. They're a German company. And the Sun's On ones are up here. But these are what we're talking about. So you can make them as like fence lines and things like that. So they're really cool. I'm excited about this. I think this is great, and I'd love for people to experiment with it. It's only happening in some of these small scale research projects in the US. And again, it's a cost issue, and it's the solar industry has figured out a really good way to make a lot of solar sites relatively quickly. They're like a machine at building these sites. And if you didn't have these permitting issues and you had some more tax credits back, they would just be pumping these out, and they're all kind of standardized. And I think it's hard to get the industry to pivot and do something that's radically different because it required changing that. That's one problem. The second problem is they're really concerned about this land use issue, and getting pushback from taking too much land. So if you have a system like these vertical panels and they're not as energy dense, meaning you have to take more acres to get the same amount of production, then a company is not going to do it because they're worried about having to get extra land leased and worried about getting into a bigger fight about taking more land for their solar site. So energy density is a really important issue. And I think that's part of the reason why you don't see these as much, because the economics aren't quite penciling out. And it's not just the companies making these decisions. When a solar company builds a site, usually they've contracted with the utility company or some other entity that they're providing power at a certain cost to. And if anything where they can't make some sort of profit based on that, if they're just if their site's too expensive to run where they can't sell energy at that cost they're contracted for, then they're kind of basically, it just creates a huge problem, and they can't then fulfill that contract. So that's why they're also really concerned about doing anything that's going to be cost prohibitive. But these are really cool. They're cool systems. They're great for like fence lines, and they'd be great for agriculture. And there's some really amazing stuff happening in Europe that I'm excited about. Yeah, this is kind of showing what this would look like. So you'd have a lot of space to put tractors through and all sorts of other cool things like that. Really cool system.
Hi, it's Chris again, farmer. So another question is, I know that the time frame from starting to potentially signing a contract with a solar developer can range from 1 to 5 years before something gets permitted or it's actually going to go forward. So within those time frames, I guess they have an option out period. During that, are the owners able to still use the land, or do usually, I guess we sign off and then, if we gotta come, we do the 48 hours up to 2 weeks? Or how does that really work? Are they usually going forward, or within those periods, there's a lot of times, since it would be a smaller solar community project, I guess, how is that? How does that work for us?
Oh, that's a great question. And I dropped a link to the American Farmland Trust in the chat, which is farmland.org. They do a lot of work, because we do less work around like the solar leasing stuff. We're like mostly helping the sheep grazers doing it on solar sites, but they have a lot of work on kind of guidance for farmers who want to lease solar. And they have some great people in Texas, which I'll connect you to when we follow up. And I think the answer to your question is, I think until they start construction and the land technically gets handed over to the EPC, the construction company, is generally speaking, you have access to the land pretty much, is my understanding of it. And, the industry got in a lot of trouble for signing a whole bunch of leases or promises for leases and then, not following through with 80% of them for a long time. A lot of companies did that, and that created a kind of a bad situation. So, yeah, and whatever that delay is, in Texas, the permitting isn't as difficult and the interconnection queue isn't as difficult. So I don't think it's as much of an issue, but it sounds like you usually have access until they start actually kind of breaking ground on the site.
Okay, and then my last question is, we have a water source, so we have river access and we have property. So if we do sheep grazing, those are benefits for the sheep, so that way they don't have to dig wells or anything extra. But what if I, as the farmer, wanted to do the the agriculture. So if I still wanted to plant on the farm where the solars are, does the farmer still have the option to do that, even though it's going to benefit the solar company because they're still getting the maintenance taken care of? Or do they have to go with the third party?
No, you can, so the landowner has, again, in the past, like the landowners haven't been as interested in sheep grazing on the solar sites, and now they're increasingly wanting to do it. So as a landowner, you can try and get that into the lease, like where you have first right of refusal to manage the land, and you can kind of specify it to whatever the agriculture you want to do on it. What kind of crops are you wanting to grow?
You could just
Just vegetables.
Yeah.
We are more into also having hay, and then sheep was very popular for all the animals for the most part, but cows and sheep were mostly it. And I know you were stating that, you know, the cost of operation to make sure since it's such a tight budget. I was trying to make sure figuring out my own property in this scenario in a sense. So with having fencing, with having river access, well, ponds, those are great benefits for the solar, for potential.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and again, the American Farmland Trust would also be a good one to talk to about that. But I think, yeah, it's one of those things where if you can get it into the contract where you have the right to do that, then that's the kind of most important part. And then figuring out also if there's a way to design the solar arrays such to make that work. And that might be like you're doing hay on part of it, and the vegetable crop might be an area just kind of outside the fence or maybe between some of the rows, but not all the rows, and maybe the rest you're doing with sheep. So there's going to be like a process of figuring it out. And there's a lot of cool people do kind of consulting around that. And there's a lot of research being done into that, which will be helpful to it. And then I think the trick is going to be finding a solar company that would want to do that and then working out a good agreement with them, which I think would be a complicated thing. So, but something that I know other folks, as far as I understand, have kind of worked out. So it'd be, yeah, but I think there's opportunity there for sure.
Thank you.
This is Randy again, and I thought I was only going to be following up on your discussion of the vertical farming, but it's vertical panels, excuse me. But it's related to the question about multiple uses and crop use of the area as well. When you were describing the bifacial vertical was the first time I realized that really this is being driven by the expansion of the solar industry. And oh, by the way, there was a service component of it that was an easy fit for the agrivoltaics. Has there been any reach directly from the large solar energy firms to any of the actual multiple use crop or things other than just the service component of it? It would strike me that that's probably just not an interesting area for them. Maybe in the future when people show success in it, but right now it's really just, we're going to build the solar installation anyways. Oh, by the way, there's a way for us to reduce costs on the service side.
Yeah, so that's a great, really great point, and it always helps me to kind of understand how I can present this to make all that clear because it's kind of complicated. But you hit the nail on the head, right? So the way this started was the solar industry was building the sites, and they figured out this was a way to do that, this maintenance on the sites, the vegetation maintenance, in a way that was either more cost effective or fulfilled some other need. There were a couple of counties in California that required it, for example, in the early days in like 2018, 2019. So yeah, exactly. So that was the initial thrust, was like the solar industry is geared towards making megawatts. That's laser focused on that. And so as they evolved, they're like in certain areas, sheep grazing was kind of cost effective. So they brought that on. And sometimes what happens sort of haphazardly where the higher ups didn't know it was happening, but the people operating the site made it happen. So a lot of kind of stuff. But now the industry has changed a lot. And there's three big things that have happened. One is these fights about permits have gotten huge in the last 2-3 years. So in terms of then the other thing that's happened is, they've increasingly understood like what land management means. And that's becoming a bigger priority for these companies, partially because of these fights, but also because of local requirements, local pushback, and then like some innate desire for ecological sustainability. And then the third thing that's happened is that sheep grazing has shown to be really cool and really viable. And so that's really the gateway drug for agrivoltaics and has gotten people excited about it in the industry. So if we step back, ultimately, the weird thing about the solar industry is that they are an environmental industry, but thinks about environmental kind of stuff, has historically thought about environmental stuff it's totally through the fact they're producing renewable energy and not as much about the land management. Now that's evolving. And so yeah, the industry is coming to us, specifically ASGA, and other groups to try and really implement this. And a lot of companies that want to do this at scale, both the sheep farming and other types of agrivoltaics, and are really excited about it. And I'd say about a good percentage of the industry is on board, either like supporting it or really excited. The other half of the industry thinks this is a joke, and they're like, "This is ridiculous. Sheep are dumb. We don't want to put crops between our rows. We'd rather just put gravel under those panels. So we don't have to think about vegetation." So that's evolving, and I'd say that the thing that is still the driver, though, will always be that cost side of it. And I think they're willing to spend the money in a place like Ohio, where if a county says, "Hey, you want to build this 200 megawatt site or 500 megawatt site," because some big sites going in up there, sure, put sheep on it or put sheep and crops on it, and then you can build it. And the company's like, "Well, a site is better than no site, so we'll do it." So that's the other kind of thing there. But there are definitely a lot of companies. Leeward, who I mentioned, they're a big supporter of ASGA, and they want to put sheep on a lot of their sites. Enel is huge on sheep grazing and agrivoltaics. So there are a lot of solar companies that are coming around to it, enthusiastic with it. But even those champions still it has to fit with their bottom line too.
This is all really exciting. I mean, we don't usually discuss the large in our group, the commercial solar. We know it's out there. We're loving the fact that the numbers are going up. It meets obviously the renewable. It's just not as don't always have as much of a utility scale or certainly agricultural scale view. I just want to remind people, here in Texas, there was no utility scale solar, 5 years ago? Everything that we're looking at pretty much has been in those last few years. So the fact that we're already talking and looking at the success that you're having with the land management and stewardship as part of that equation, is, in my opinion, a success story. Are there any other questions? We're closing up the meeting here. If there's anybody else who wants their last.
So James had on the end of the text. James had a couple of some comments about goats.
Yeah. So people use goats for landscaping, for urban landscaping. I know Denton has has had people use it on their parks. I met one of the grazers did that. So a number of those people who do there's like a goats on the go kind of thing, like a national org, that do targeted grazing with goats and sheep or just goats have joined ASGA and either gotten a flock for sheep and started doing some solar sites with those sheep. So there's a bunch of people who have done that. Some of them end up not doing the solar grazing part. Again, goats you can't use on solar sites currently. I've heard a couple people doing it successfully, but in general in the industry, the solar companies will say no. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on in California with targeted grazing with goats and sheep for fire mitigation outside of solar sites, just around helipads and other infrastructure. It's a huge business out there, and it's really cool and really exciting, especially on those hillsides where you can't get mowers up. And with the fire issues out there, it's massive. And they also do vineyard grazing too. There's targeted grazing of vineyards. So targeted grazing is the catch-all word for using sheep, goats, and other animals to manage vegetation, generally speaking. And it's a long-standing industry. And targeted grazing around vineyards is really cool to manage the grass there. And then there's tons of other applications as well. So it's really cool.
And you had mentioned this temporary or mobile or whatever fencing. So if you had a property that didn't anticipate that you were going to be asking a herd in to do your landscaping, and even if it's a large area, a municipal airport or something like that, I mean, you can section off a little piece of it and it's no big deal. And they come in for a few days and then they're gone again.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing, yeah, exactly. So you use these electric fencing to section it off and graze it. The only thing that's complicated in that kind of scenario is if you're in Texas, coyotes can be an issue. So if you're not out there with the sheep, or if they're out there for a couple of days, these solar sites have big external fences to help with that. So maybe they'll bring livestock guardian dogs or something to help. But yeah, they do it. Yeah, the temporary fencing is big for it. Electric net fencing or polywire, and it's a really cool operation. I'd love to see more of it in just general landscaping because it's just so fun.
And maybe one fun comment about the goats. Lissa, at the end of the chat, put a comment. She moved up to Michigan, and then up there they raise the solar panels out of goat reach in the summer. So evidently they raise and lower the panels when the goats are in there. They get them out of the way.
Oh, sweet.
I'm suspecting that may just be they tilt them up to 45. That's our latitude. And then they lower them. They just said raise on the website. So I thought that was an amusing idea.
Yeah, if they're doing it, probably what they do is if it's a tracker system, they'll make it flat like this. That's what people have talked about doing for cattle too. If they don't raise the panel height, they just make it because when it's noontime, they'll be pretty much flat or about flat.
Right.
So if you just left it like that, maybe the cattle or goats could go under without messing with the panels. So that's.
But I think their focus is really eradicating invasive plants, and they use a little bit to trim the grass for the panels.
Exactly. And the goats are good for that. And that's sometimes on a site where you're just mowing or using sheep and mowing, you might just have to control some of those super bad species. But yeah, the invasive species is there's a whole lot we could talk about with the species part of it, which is fascinating to me about weeds and stuff like that and how to do on solar.
Yeah, and again, the engagement to show, oh, well, we're bringing this in, but look at all the things we can do. Well, or you want to get the contract that we will do for the land management is evolving, but a lot of potential there. Okay, I appreciate our both in-person and virtual audience, and most especially our guest speaker today. Thank you very much. It was a really also know we got a local asset that we can call on, or at least you got some roots back here. So
I dropped my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be usually in Denton pretty often. A couple times a year, we'll be out here for like a month or so. One of the agreements for us moving back east was we had to bring the grandkids back around the holidays. So we are.
And just a reminder that the American Solar Energy Society Solar 2026 big convention is going to be in Austin in October. So I hope there's somebody there involving agrivoltaics that's going to be there at that convention, and they're looking for speakers and panels and things. So are you familiar with? If you're not familiar with it, out forward they're looking for papers and speakers and things like that.
Yeah, please do. The big conference we know about is RE Plus, is the big renewable energy conference. It gets about 40,000 people to it in Vegas, and then they do regional ones, including one in Houston, RE Plus Texas, which is happening in March. But that's the main one we know about. Right. There's like another one happening in Dallas that's from different groups, like Large Site Solar or something like that. But those are like trade ones. But yeah, forward that to me. I'd love to learn about it.
Okay, I'll send the email to you. Well, thank you very much. I think we're finished now. Do you have anything else?
Nothing else. We won't be seeing or hearing from most of you until after the holiday season. So be safe, be happy out there, and thanks for attending.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks. See ya.
Okay, I'm going to close the recording.
It works.